I'm very pleased to welcome Aman Gupta, who's the founder and the managing partner of SPAG, and a firm that specializes in health communication, but he's actually been in the health communication field for almost close to 3 decades. Welcome, Aman, to this very important discussion on what is the way ahead for health communicators.
Thanks, Parul. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. And health has been my core, and I'm really happy that it started to gain the recognition, even if it is in a challenging time. But it's something which was required, and it's happening now.
In fact, that is my very first question to you. Health communication has always been like, I would not say the stepsister, but sort of not a priority practice for a lot of PR firms and health communication. And this reflects also in how the government was spending on health and how the newspapers and the media also focuses on health. But given the current crisis, what do you think are the major trends in health communication which are arising?
Well, I think, Parul, one we could sort of see is that it's not for the first time. So while the pandemic, what we're having and the extent of the scale might be unprecedented, but we have had large public health challenges in the past. And whenever a public health challenge happens, the health communication becomes important, and then it sort of remains like that. So the previous, when it was when the HIV/AIDS issue happened, and and that's what sort of really brought me into the public health communication side at that time. Working with different development sector organizations and working with the industry per se. What will happen going forward? One is healthcare as an industry is not just one. There are different industry verticals within healthcare. So from a pharmaceutical to medical technology to hospitals and laboratories, the diagnostics part, to the government as a stakeholder, and then the whole civil society and the development sector. And each will react very differently, or their pathway will be little different from each of the other ones. So if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, there will be a communication which will continue to focus on the role of the innovation, because as we do realize that there are health challenges which comes up, which we have not really which we have not sort of seen, and therefore to continue to innovate is something which they will be really focusing on. But also I think there will be a larger focus now on the supply chain, because a year back, if I would have gone to a journalist or talked to any other stakeholder saying we want to talk about supply chain of the pharma industry, nobody would have found it interesting. But right now people are interested to know how the supply chain and why it matters to the people. So things will change. People would like to go more deeper in the industry and how it operates. The second is the medical devices or the technology sector, which was kind of on the sidelines compared to the pharma, will start to become much more critical. It will be at a more center of conversation, which we have realized specifically, when they realize that the healthcare infrastructure is not so strong across, to in case the numbers go up, from a basic issues of, PPEs, personal protective equipments, to ventilators. These are things which nobody would have thought that we will not have enough, not just in a country like India, but in countries like US, who are supposed to be like a developed economies, and how technology can really play an important role. That will be really, big. So medical devices and technology sector, the health tech startup sector would be really on an upswing going forward. The whole hospital ecosystem will be a little difficult, because people will be scared of going into the hospitals, right? At least for the next, I would say, year or two. So they really need to look at a very different way of communicating to their audience. The development sector and the government, which I look at kind of a two sides of the same coin, will be really working on bringing the new normal as a normal, because going ahead, the social ecosystem will change. People need to go through a lot of behavior change communication. So the whole behavior change communication and the role of the civil society and the development sector will be huge. Also, as and when we have the vaccines, how do you deploy the vaccine? Will be something which the government and the civil society needs to ensure that it is not just accessible, but it is also across, because not every country or every organization or every individual will be able to afford it. So how do you ensure access and affordability to the vaccines will be an important part. So they will be really focusing on that.
So, coming to an issue you raised about the supply chain management, a lot of the reagents and the ingredients of bulk drug manufacturers in India was coming from China.
Right.
Given the supply challenge of that, but also the world's negative view of China at the moment, how do you find bulk drug manufacturers, reacting and communicating in this situation?
Well, I think one aspect which we are seeing coming from the political side is more of an inward looking. Even if you look at our own Prime Minister Modi ji last year talked about the fact that we need to be more how do you say we need to have everything in house. So Make in India was always there, but the fact that we are ready to take care of our own needs will be higher. We do and there are gonna be in the coming years a stronger focus on ensuring that the APIs and all the raw materials which till now are getting sourced from the China, we are able to produce within the country, and the capacity exists. So it's not that the capacity doesn't exist. There were enough APIs. It's just that it had a cost leverage, so people might have shifted to China, but that will come back to India, and I think India has an opportunity right now to really become a complete supplier. We used to be called the pharmacy of the world, so it's time to reimagine that and ensure that we become the pharmacy of the world again.
Coming back to an issue you kind of also flagged off, that politicians are looking inwards, countries are looking inwards. Health, in a way, has always been political. The access to health has always been a political issue, but never have we seen such a heightened political point of view on health, and that's quite normal. What is your view on how that will impact farmers, especially farmers, and how they communicate? And also, just to add, the vaccine trials. We saw that with the pentavalent vaccine introduction, how controversial vaccines have always been controversial. So, can you shed light on some of these issues which would emerge?
Okay. So let me sort of divide this question in three parts. The first part is the role of the political ecosystem, going ahead. As we know, health is completely related to economics, and economics is related to the politics part of it. Having said that, that realization between the interdependence between health and economy, while it existed, it was not the core of the thinking at the political ecosystem. So health was there, but it was still at the periphery. I'm hoping, so I'm not saying it will happen for sure, but I'm hoping that health will come at the center of policy making in India, and I think it's much needed. We do need to therefore look at a higher spend, which is happening in the healthcare. There's a much bigger push on developing our healthcare system. So health system needs to be strengthened in the coming months. One of the big area which the government needs to be really focusing from a policy part would be the data collection. So as Parul, we know, we've been, you have been part of the, the healthcare. The big issue which we have is that there's not enough data in India, and without data, therefore, decision making becomes a difficult task. So I think that whole aspect of data collection and using technology for data collection will be a big push, and the government needs to therefore realize that they can't do everything of their own. So they need to look at a more of a multi-stakeholder approach. They need to bring in the private sector, and not just within the country. They have to look at certain kind of a global harmonization, because everything can't be done. So we need to look at what our strengths are and therefore make it within the country, or sort of make it more like, this is what we specialize into. But we also need to have an ability to align ourselves with the expertise of other countries. So whether that resides in the US or Europe or any other part of the world, we need to have a kind of a global harmonization. So while you may have an inward looking, you also need to have a global outlook to source the best which is available. So that's what we need at this moment in the country.
So coming to the WHO, I mean, it's of course been under the scanner, and there's a lot of controversy. We're not even going to get into that. But what are your apprehensions when it comes to communicating about credibility? Because WHO was that one global standard of, the guidelines they issued, and now with the USA saying they'll not contribute their bit and calling into question whether they actually, exposed the virus correctly or at the right time when it happened in China. What is your opinion on these added layers of complexity, and how will it impact the credibility of the healthcare sector?
Well, I think there are two parts. One, we do need WHO kind of an organization for the world to really fight such kind of pandemics. So we can't do away. It may not be the perfect organization. It may have its own weaknesses. So my personal view on that is that we should be really looking at strengthening the institution and ensure that it plays its role. By withdrawing the funds, we are not really doing any good to anyone. So I think that's a very kind of a personal view on the WHO. Second is that none of the organization, the healthcare, they really look at communication at the beginning. The communication is usually an afterthought.
Yeah.
And that is a struggle which we as an SPAG always continue to have, and we continue to push organization that you cannot have communication at the end of your project thinking. Communication needs to be at the core. It has to be at the beginning. And how will you communicate? And Parul, as you know, that later last year we did come out with our own report on how the healthcare communication will look like in this decade. And I think that report is now much more relevant than what it was, because we talked about the VET model, the value, expertise, and trust. And that is a model which could, at a modular level, tell companies who that audience will be, because coming months they have to have a kind of a blueprint and a roadmap, and in each step they may need to look at what are they focusing on. Either they're focusing on value or expertise or trust for which audience. So I think if we look at current part of it, so any institution which is really at the forefront of fighting this epidemic, they need to look at communication in a big way, including, say, the government of India. How are they communicating with their different audiences?
That's actually a great insight. One final set of questions. The G20 health ministers meeting just took place. It was not, again, without its fair share of issues, and the final statement did not agree on commitments from the G20 countries. What is your sense of the global health communication trends emerging from the G20 meeting? What are they signaling?
Well, I think, I was really hopeful that the G20 was a great opportunity for the global leaders to come together and have a kind of a unanimous view on the way forward. But it hasn't happened. So I think it was an opportunity missed. Having said that, I'm hoping that, things will come, they would have to regroup and, bring in a huddle. Countries are doing at their own level, but and it needs things that are different. It's a completely unprecedented world as is emerging. And therefore, first step will be to really look at how do we ensure that we are coming out of this whole lockdown? Because, the key question is that once the lockdown opens, or how do you really open the lockdown? What are the signals? What do you really need outside in this world? And I think there has to be kind of a uniformity on what it would mean, whether it means testing, whether it means contact tracing, whether it means that, we have a new physical distancing norm, and those things in place, and the business could still operate in that particular new world. And then, of course, the vaccine, which is kind of, where we'll be sort of heading towards. And this is something which the global governments of people across the world needs to have kind of a uniformity on. G20 was a missed opportunity. Hopefully, the world will come together, and it has usually come together. The catalyst might be different. It might be a very non-political or non-governmental organization which may bring it. But yes, I think that's an important thing for it to, which we should be looking forward to.
Thank you, Aman. That was Aman Gupta, founder and managing partner of SPAG. I don't think I've ever enjoyed an interview more than I've enjoyed it today. I've learned so much. And I think it'll be really useful for both the media and the health communicators community. Thank you, Aman, for your time.
Thanks,
and your
Carol. It was a pleasure, and thanks for hosting me.
Thank you.